Spain did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it felt invincible. This story does not open on a battlefield or in a moment of defeat. It opens in motion, with ships crossing oceans, holds packed with silver, sails catching Atlantic wind, as if history itself were pushing them forward. Picture harbors alive with noise and expectation. Cranes creak, chains rattle, chests heavy with metal are lifted from the dark bellies of ships. This is not the image of an empire in danger. This is the image of success, of arrival, of a state that believes it has solved the ancient problem of power. Money, at last, seems unlimited, and with it comes a quiet, dangerous idea, that wealth itself is strength. For Spain, abundance became proof. Proof that it had risen above the limits that humbled other kingdoms. Proof that rules no longer applied. Wars could be financed before they were even justified. Rivals could be pressured, bribed, or simply outspent. Mistakes could be postponed, covered, or ignored. When silver arrived by the ton, consequences felt distant. Debt was not a warning. It was a strategy. Borrow now, pay later. There would always be another shipment, another fleet, another influx of metal to smooth over problems that would have demanded discipline in any other age. Think about that. An empire so rich it no longer needed to choose. Inside royal courts, this belief hardened into policy. Rooms glowed with gold leaf and polished stone. Tapestries told stories of conquest and divine favor. Account books grew thick, but urgency thinned. When money is hard to earn, it teaches restraint. When it arrives effortlessly, it teaches confidence. Spain learned the wrong lesson. Wealth did not feel like a resource that could vanish. It felt like a force of nature, as predictable as the tides, as reliable as the sun. And so decisions were made with a short horizon, not because leaders were foolish, but because the system rewarded delay. Why fix what tomorrow's silver could cover today? This is where the story turns away from myth. Spain's collapse is often told as a tale of military overstretch or foreign rivalry. Those forces mattered, but they were not the root. The root was financial comfort. Easy money altered the psychology of power. It changed how leaders thought about risk, time, and responsibility. When spending is painless, discipline looks unnecessary. When income seems infinite, productivity feels optional. The empire began to mistake cash flow for control. It looked at the movement of money and assumed it reflected real strength. But money moving through a system is not the same as a system that can stand on its own. Imagine standing in a palace built with imported stone, decorated with imported goods, defended by soldiers paid with borrowed funds. The walls shine. The halls echo with ceremony. Everything appears solid. Yet beneath the floor, the structure depends on something far away. Mines across an ocean. Routes vulnerable to storms, piracy, and politics. A single stream feeding an entire body. As long as it flows, the body moves. When it slows, everything feels a strain. Spain did not ask what would happen if that flow changed. It asked only how much more could be spent before it did. The stakes could not have been higher. Spain commanded territories across continents. It shaped trade routes, dictated alliances, and projected authority on a global scale. Its decisions affected markets, wars, and the lives of millions. This was not a small state gambling with its future. This was a world empire, rewriting the rules of power in real time. And at the center of it all sat a dangerous assumption. That money could substitute for capacity. That purchasing power could replace productive strength. That as long as the treasury filled, the foundations would hold. But history is not kind to assumptions, especially economic ones. Money is a claim on value, not value itself. It represents work done somewhere, resources extracted somewhere, effort applied somewhere. When that somewhere is always outside your borders, dependence grows invisibly. Spain's wealth was real, but its source mattered more than its size. The empire did not generate this money through broad domestic productivity. It received it, and receiving wealth is not the same as creating it. That difference would define Spain's fate. At first, no one noticed the trade-off. The empire looked unstoppable. Armies marched. Diplomacy bent in Spain's favor. Creditors lined up to lend, confident that silver would cover any risk. The more Spain borrowed, the more lenders trusted it. A feedback loop formed. Wealth increased credibility. Credibility increased borrowing. Borrowing increased spending. Spending reinforced the image of power. The cycle fed itself. And cycles like this feel permanent, right up until the moment they break. This chapter is about that moment before awareness, before panic, before decline had a name. It is about the calm confidence that precedes fragility. Spain believed it had escaped the old limits that governed states. Limits of production, limits of taxation, limits of patience. Money seemed to erase them all, but those limits were not gone. They were deferred, pushed into the future by silver and debt, waiting quietly for the moment when postponement would no longer be possible. Ask the central question now, before the collapse begins. Can borrowed wealth sustain real power? Or does it slowly replace the habits that make power durable? Spain chose the easier path, without realizing it was a narrowing one. Each decision made sense on its own. Each expense felt justified. Each delay felt harmless. Together, they built a system that could not survive a shock. Not because Spain lacked money, but because it forgot how strength is made. This is not a story of greed alone. It is a story of incentives, of how abundance can distort judgment, of how success can blind even the most capable states. Spain's leaders were not ignorant of risk. They simply believed time was on their side, and time, fueled by easy money, appeared endless. The tragedy is that by the time the question could no longer be ignored, the answer had already been written into the structure of the empire. This chapter sets the tension that will drive everything that follows. An empire at its peak, flush with wealth, confident in its future, standing on foundations it no longer inspects. The silver keeps coming. The spending continues. The applause grows louder. And beneath it all, unseen but unstoppable, the mechanics of decline are already turning. To understand why Spain felt unstoppable, you have to see the world as it appeared at the height of its ascent. This was an age defined by movement. Ships crossed oceans with regularity, once thought impossible. Ports expanded to meet demand. Warehouses filled and emptied in cycles that felt permanent. From the outside, Spain looked less like a kingdom and more like a machine that converted distant Earth into immediate power. Silver arrived in volumes unseen in European history. It moved from docks to treasuries, from treasuries to armies, from armies to influence. The speed of that movement mattered. Wealth that arrives slowly invites planning. Wealth that arrives quickly encourages belief. Cities reflected this confidence. Streets widened. New buildings rose beside old ones, symbols of continuity and dominance. Construction became a language of certainty. Palaces signaled permanence. Cathedrals projected divine approval. Every stone suggested a future already secured. This visual strength reinforced political confidence. Leaders did not feel constrained by budgets or patience. They felt backed by a force larger than policy. When money flows in faster than it can be fully understood, it begins to feel natural. Like rain, like harvest, like something that simply happens. From abroad, the view was even more striking. Other states struggled to raise taxes, negotiate loans, or maintain armies. Spain did all three with apparent ease. It could fight multiple wars across different regions at the same time. It could supply fleets, pay mercenaries, and fund allies without pausing to ask where the next payment would come from. Rivals saw strength. Creditors saw security. Merchants saw opportunity. Few saw vulnerability. Why would they? Vulnerability usually shows itself through shortage. Spain displayed excess. But excess has a hidden cost. When resources arrive without friction, decision-making changes. Hard choices fade into the background. Trade-offs feel optional. Spain could import goods rather than develop them. It could hire foreign expertise instead of building domestic skill. It could buy what it lacked rather than create it. Each choice made sense in isolation. Together, they reshaped the economy. Production shifted outward. Consumption moved inward. The empire became a hub through which wealth passed, not a base from which it grew. Think about that. An empire rich enough to pay others to do what it once did itself. Workshops closed quietly as imported goods undercut local prices. Skilled labor followed opportunity elsewhere. Why invest years mastering a trade when foreign products were cheaper and faster? Why risk capital on manufacturing when silver could buy finished goods immediately? The market answered these questions with brutal efficiency. Domestic industry shrank, not because it was forbidden, but because it was unnecessary. At least, it seemed that way. This is how the illusion of strength deepened. Spain did not feel weaker as its productive base eroded. It felt freer. Freed from the constraints of labor, infrastructure, and patience. Freed from the slow grind of development. Money made everything easier. It smoothed delays. It solved shortages. It masked dependency. The empire measured health by the fullness of its coffers, not by the resilience of its economy. And as long as silver arrived, those coffers stayed full. The structure of trade reinforced this illusion. Spain became a buyer, not a builder. Wealth flowed out as quickly as it flowed in. Imported textiles, weapons, tools, and luxury goods filled markets. Foreign merchants prospered. Foreign industries expanded. Spain paid the bill. This arrangement worked as long as income exceeded outflow. And for a long time, it did. That surplus created confidence. Confidence turned into habit. Habit hardened into assumption. At the political level, the effects were subtle but profound. Tax reform lost urgency. Why anger elites or restructure systems when external wealth filled the gaps? Administrative inefficiencies were tolerated. Corruption became manageable. Every flaw could be patched with money. Instead of strengthening institutions, the empire learned to bypass them. Systems that should have evolved froze in place, preserved by funding rather than performance. Stability was purchased, not earned. This matters because institutions are muscles. They grow through use and strain. Spain's institutions were spared that strain. Money absorbed pressure that would have forced adaptation. When challenges arose, the response was not reform but spending. When revenues dipped, borrowing bridged the gap. Credit was plentiful because silver guaranteed repayment. The cycle deepened. External wealth supported internal weakness. Internal weakness increased reliance on external wealth. From a distance, the empire looked unified and decisive. Armies moved with authority. Diplomacy carried weight. Maps painted Spain's color across oceans. Yet beneath that surface, the economy resembled a hollow structure. Strong walls, thin beams, load-bearing elements outsourced. The empire's power depended less on what it could sustain and more on what it could afford. That distinction would prove fatal. The speed of money masked this reality. Silver did not linger long enough to reveal its effects. It arrived, circulated, and exited. The faster it moved, the harder it was to see what it left behind. Inflation crept in quietly. Prices adjusted upward as more money chased the same goods. Those with fixed incomes fell behind. Those connected to trade or finance adapted. Inequality widened. But these were slow signals, easy to ignore amid visible prosperity. Spain's leaders interpreted this environment as success. They believed they had discovered a formula other states lacked: access to resources on a global scale, financial leverage without immediate cost, the ability to project power without building it domestically. This belief was reinforced every time a crisis passed without consequence. Each avoided reckoning strengthened confidence. Each delayed reform made delay seem rational. This chapter is about that confidence. Not arrogance, but assurance. The sense that history was on Spain's side, that its system worked because it kept working. Movement replaced structure as the marker of strength. Ships arriving mattered more than factories running. Payments clearing mattered more than productivity rising. The empire judged itself by what it could spend, not by what it could sustain. And this is where the trap closed. Because systems built on movement are vulnerable to interruption. Systems built on structure endure shocks. Spain chose speed over resilience without realizing the choice was being made. It did not feel like a trade-off. It felt like progress. Why wait to build when you can buy now? Why invest in capacity when capacity can be rented indefinitely? The illusion held because the world cooperated. Trade routes remained open. Mines remained productive. Credit remained available. For a time, every assumption was validated. Spain's apparent invincibility was real in appearance and fragile in substance. It was built on conditions it did not control and habits it did not examine. This chapter shows why collapse was not obvious at the peak, why warning signs were dismissed, why wealth blinded rather than warned. Spain did not fall from strength to weakness overnight. It drifted there, carried by the very abundance that made it feel secure. The empire mistook circulation for creation, spending for capacity, and access for ownership. When power is measured by what arrives rather than what endures, decline begins quietly. Spain stood at the center of the world, confident and admired, unaware that the foundation of its strength was thinning with every easy decision. The silver kept coming. The system kept moving. And that movement convinced an empire it could never stop. The cracks did not announce themselves with chaos. They arrived as routines. As patterns repeated, so often they stopped being questioned. Easy money reshaped behavior across the empire, not through decree, but through incentives. When silver could buy anything, investment felt unnecessary. When foreign wealth covered gaps, reform felt optional. Over time, this logic seeped into every layer of decision-making. Production slowed because purchasing was faster. Innovation stalled because importation was cheaper. The economy adapted to abundance by leaning on it. And with every adaptation, Spain's internal capacity weakened a little more. Inflation was one of the first quiet signals. As silver poured into markets, prices rose. This was not dramatic at first. It felt like adjustment, like progress. More money meant higher costs, and higher costs meant growth, or so it seemed. But wages did not keep pace. Those tied to trade or finance benefited. Those who produced goods struggled. Local manufacturers found themselves undercut by imports paid for with silver. Their margins shrank. Workshops closed. Skills disappeared. The empire grew richer in appearance and poorer in function at the same time. Why invest in manufacturing when foreign goods were abundant and affordable? Why reform taxes when external income covered deficits? These questions answered themselves through behavior. Spain chose convenience. It chose speed. It chose now. Each choice made sense within the moment. None accounted for dependency. The core economic mechanism was simple and unforgiving. External wealth weakened internal capacity. The more Spain relied on silver, the less capable it became without it. This reliance altered fiscal discipline. Spending expanded because it could. Borrowing increased because repayment seemed guaranteed. Creditors mattered more than citizens because creditors financed continuity. Debt piled up not as a crisis, but as a feature. Loans funded wars before revenues existed to support them. Interest payments became a fixed cost, absorbing income before it reached the broader economy. The empire learned to operate with obligations that assumed future wealth would always arrive. At first, the system absorbed strain. When expenses rose, borrowing bridged the gap. When revenue dipped, credit smoothed the curve. Each solution reinforced the next problem. Debt required interest. Interest required income. Income required silver. Silver became not a benefit, but a necessity. Each shipment mattered more than the last. Dependence deepened invisibly. Then conditions shifted. Not suddenly, but enough to matter. Silver flows slowed. Costs rose. Wars dragged on longer and farther from home. Maintaining armies consumed resources faster than expected. Interest consumed revenue before it could circulate. The margin of error vanished. The empire discovered that it could not pause spending without consequences. Soldiers expected pay. Suppliers demanded settlement. Allies required support. The system had no brakes. Imagine vaults still holding silver, yet the machinery around them stalling. Money existed, but timing failed. Payments delayed. Confidence wavered. Creditors grew cautious. Once trust hesitates, leverage collapses quickly. Borrowing became harder. Refinancing grew expensive. The empire faced reality it had long deferred. It had money, but not flexibility. Wealth, but not resilience. This was a turning point. Not the loss of riches, but the loss of independence. Spain crossed from powerful to fragile when it could no longer choose its pace. Decisions were dictated by obligations rather than strategy. Economic policy became reactive. Spending served debt instead of development. The empire's priorities narrowed to survival of the system itself. Inflation worsened as authorities attempted to manage shortages with money rather than reform. Prices climbed again. Public confidence eroded. Social strain increased. But these pressures were symptoms, not causes. The cause lay deeper. In years of substituting spending for structure, Spain had not lost money. It had lost the ability to generate it internally at scale. This distinction mattered. States that produce can adjust. States that receive must hope. Spain had built an economy optimized for inflow, not output. When inflow slowed, there was nothing to compensate. No robust industrial base. No flexible tax system. No institutional muscle trained by scarcity. The empire had avoided hardship, so long it no longer knew how to respond to it. The illusion finally cracked because reality changed faster than belief. Leaders who once postponed reform now faced immediate constraints. Options narrowed. Choices hardened. Every path forward carried pain that could no longer be deferred. The system that once absorbed shocks now amplified them. This chapter marks the moment Spain's trajectory became irreversible, not because collapse was inevitable, but because the tools needed to prevent it had been allowed to rust. Easy money had rewritten incentives so completely that recovery demanded sacrifices the system was not built to make. The empire still stood. Its borders remained vast, its symbols intact. But beneath them, the economic engine sputtered. Power had shifted from creation to maintenance, from strategy to obligation. Spain had crossed a line it could not see at the time, a line between wealth that empowers and wealth that entraps. From here on, decline would not be dramatic. It would be procedural, managed, extended. The kind of fall that looks like stability until it suddenly does not. The kind that teaches its lesson too late for those living through it. Collapse did not arrive as a single disaster. It arrived as a narrowing of choices. Spain did not wake up one morning to find its empire gone. It woke up to constraints. Budgets that no longer stretched. Armies that could not be maintained at full strength. Diplomatic promises that carried less weight because they were backed by less certainty. The empire still looked imposing on maps. Its territories still spanned oceans. But power was no longer exercised freely. It was negotiated with creditors, rationed by shortages, and delayed by administrative strain. As debts grew heavier, flexibility disappeared. Revenue that once funded expansion now serviced interest. Money moved, but it no longer built. It preserved appearances. Military campaigns became harder to sustain. Victories grew rarer, not because soldiers lacked courage, but because logistics demanded resources Spain could no longer mobilize easily. Supply chains stretched thin. Payments arrived late. Morale eroded quietly. Power does not vanish when confidence breaks. It leaks away. Cities reflected the slow retreat. Growth stalled. Construction slowed. Workshops that once buzzed remained closed. Young workers left in search of opportunity elsewhere. The economy did not collapse into chaos. It settled into stagnation. A state can survive stagnation for a long time, but empires cannot expand within it. Spain's influence receded not because it was defeated everywhere, but because it could no longer dominate anywhere with certainty. Political leverage weakened in the same way. Allies noticed hesitation. Rivals tested boundaries. Creditors imposed terms. Decisions once made from strength were now shaped by necessity. Policy became defensive. The empire focused on holding what it had rather than shaping what came next. Easy money had delayed reform so long that reform, when it arrived, demanded pain the system could not absorb. What followed was not sudden ruin, but long fading, a loss of relevance disguised as continuity. Spain remained a state of consequence, but no longer the one that set the rhythm of the world. Other powers rose with economies built on production, trade balance, and institutional strength. They learned to generate wealth internally rather than rely on external windfalls. They built capacity where Spain had built dependence. This is the true aftermath of easy money. It does not always destroy visibly. It erodes quietly. It trades future strength for present comfort. Spain's empire demonstrates that control without capacity is temporary. Wealth without structure does not last. When finance outruns fundamentals, power becomes brittle. And brittle systems do not break loudly. They fail when stress arrives, and there is nothing left to bend. The lesson echoes beyond history. Any system that treats income as strength risks the same fate. When money substitutes for productivity, resilience disappears. Easy money feels like freedom. It removes friction. It delays consequences. But it also rewrites incentives in ways that are hard to reverse. By the time the cost becomes clear, the habits are already set. Spain's story is not about silver alone. It is about dependence. About believing that access is ownership. About confusing the movement of wealth with the creation of it. The empire did not fall when resources disappeared. It fell when those resources became too easy to get, too reliable to question, and too central to function without. History does not punish ambition. It punishes imbalance. Spain reached heights few states ever achieve. Its decline was not inevitable. It was engineered slowly through decisions that felt rational, even prudent at the time. That is what makes the story enduring. The danger was never obvious. It was comfortable. When the flow finally slowed, Spain discovered that power built on convenience cannot adapt to constraint. Strength must be practiced to exist. Capacity must be maintained to matter. Without them, wealth becomes a liability rather than an asset. This is why the story still matters. Because the mechanics have not changed. Only the forms have. Easy money still tempts systems into complacency. Debt still disguises weakness as stability. And decline still begins not with collapse, but with comfort. If you want to understand how empires fall without a final battle, this is where to look. And if you want more stories like this, where history, economics, and power intersect, subscribe to the channel and share this documentary with others who want to see how the past keeps repeating itself.